The manila envelope arrived at my desk on a Tuesday morning with no return address, containing procurement documents that would unravel a web of corruption spanning 3 years. I'm Reed Bishop, 34 years old, and I've spent the last 8 years as a benchmarking correspondent for the Billings Tribune's investigation team here in Montana. My specialty involves analyzing competitive bidding processes and government contract awards, work that most people find tedious but I find fascinating. The patterns tell stories that officials prefer to keep buried. The envelope contained photocopies of internal memoranda from Yellowstone Regional Testing Laboratory, a private facility that had secured over $2 million in state environmental testing contracts since 2021. What caught my attention wasn't the dollar amounts, it was the timestamps on the procurement rule modifications. Each document bore the letterhead of laboratory owner Flint Sterling, whose signature appeared on revised bidding criteria that seemed tailored to eliminate competitors. The modifications were subtle, requiring specific equipment models that only Sterling's facility possessed, demanding certifications that took months to obtain, and implementing technical specifications that favored his laboratory's capabilities. I spread the documents across my desk and opened my laptop to access the Montana procurement database through our Tribune subscription. Cross-referencing the dates revealed a disturbing pattern. Sterling had submitted rule change requests to the Montana Department of Environmental Quality exactly 14 days before each major contract announcement. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the DEQC meeting minutes from March 15th. Look for Agenda Item 7B. They buried it in supplemental materials. I pulled up the Department of Environmental Quality Commission archives and located the March meeting transcripts. Agenda Item 7B was listed simply as Administrative Procedures Review. The discussion lasted 4 minutes according to the official record, but the supplemental materials contained a 40-page technical amendment to procurement standards. The amendment language was dense with regulatory jargon, but the effect was clear. It created barriers that would disqualify Sterling's 2 main competitors from future bidding processes. The vote was unanimous, with no public comment period recorded. I reached for my secure phone and dialed Kyla Sterling, no relation to Flint, a former DEQC compliance officer who had left the department 6 months earlier. She had been helpful on previous stories involving environmental regulations. "Reed, I wondered when you'd call about this," she said before I could explain why I was reaching out. "I've been waiting for someone to notice the pattern." Her voice carried a weight that suggested she knew more than the documents revealed. The procurement modifications were just the beginning of something larger, and I was starting to understand that this investigation would require every technique I had learned in 8 years of following paper trails. The truth was hidden somewhere in the bureaucratic maze of rule changes and contract awards, and someone had taken considerable risk to point me toward it. Kyla Sterling agreed to meet at the Copper King Mansion's public gardens the following afternoon. The location provided privacy while remaining completely above board, a lesson learned from previous investigations where source protection was paramount. She arrived, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone who had been carrying a burden for months. We sat on a bench overlooking the historic mansion's grounds as she explained her departure from the DEQC. "I didn't quit," she said quietly. "I was reassigned to a position that didn't exist. When I started asking questions about the procurement changes, my supervisor suggested I might be happier elsewhere." The envelope contained photocopies of internal DEQC emails spanning 6 months. The correspondence revealed a coordinated effort to modify procurement standards, with specific language crafted to exclude competitors while appearing neutral on paper. One email from Deputy Director Marcus Flint Caldwell to Commissioner Patricia Flint Hawthorne was particularly revealing. The Sterling Laboratories specifications should be incorporated as minimum standards. This ensures quality while maintaining competitive appearance. I photographed each document with my Canon EOS R5, ensuring the metadata would verify authenticity. The timestamps showed the emails preceded the public rule changes by weeks, contradicting the department's claims that modifications were reactive to industry feedback. "There's more," Kyla said, producing a second set of documents. Sterling Laboratories submitted detailed technical specifications to the department before any public request for proposals was issued. They were writing the rules they would later bid under. The specifications were identical to language that appeared in the final procurement standards. Sterling had essentially authored the criteria that would determine contract awards, creating an insurmountable advantage over competitors. I spent the next week verifying the document trail through multiple sources. The Montana Secretary of State's business registration database showed Sterling Laboratories had hired Flint Morrison, a former DEQC regulatory specialist, as a consultant 3 months before the rule changes began. Morrison's LinkedIn profile confirmed his employment history and current consulting role. His expertise in environmental compliance regulations made him the perfect intermediary between Sterling and his former colleagues. Using the Freedom of Information Act, I requested all correspondence between Sterling Laboratories and DEQC officials for the relevant time period. The response arrived 2 weeks later, heavily redacted, but containing enough unblack text to confirm the pattern. The document showed Sterling had submitted preliminary technical assessments that were later incorporated verbatim into official procurement standards. The company had effectively written the rules under which they would compete. I contacted Dr. Elena Flint Vasquez, director of the Montana Environmental Testing Consortium, Sterling's primary competitor. Her organization had lost 3 major contracts to Sterling despite submitting lower bids. We couldn't understand how our proposals kept falling short of technical requirements, she explained during our phone interview. The specifications seemed tailored to exclude our capabilities while favoring Sterling's exact equipment and methodologies. Her suspicions were confirmed when I shared the timeline of rule changes. Each modification had eliminated advantages her consortium possessed while highlighting Sterling's strengths. The financial impact was substantial. Sterling had secured $2.3 million in state contracts over 8 months, representing a 340% increase from their previous annual revenue. The company's growth coincided precisely with the procurement modifications. I obtained Sterling Laboratories' corporate filings from the Montana Department of Revenue. The document showed the company had hired 2 additional staff members and purchased expensive testing equipment immediately after securing the first modified contract, suggesting they had advanced knowledge of upcoming awards. Cross-referencing bank records available through public disclosure requirements revealed Sterling had made a $15,000 payment to Morrison Consulting LLC on the same day the first rule change was submitted to DEQC. The payment was listed as regulatory compliance consulting, but the timing suggested something more specific. Morrison had been paid to help Sterling navigate rules he had helped create while employed by the state. I reached out to Morrison directly, identifying myself as a Tribune reporter investigating procurement processes. He declined to comment, but didn't deny the consulting relationship or the timeline of his involvement. My editor, Sarah Chen, reviewed the evidence during our weekly investigation meeting. The documentation was solid, but we needed official response from DEQC before publication. I submitted detailed questions to the department's public information officer, outlining the timeline and requesting comment on the procurement modifications. The response came 3 days later. All rule changes followed established procedures and were implemented to ensure the highest quality environmental testing services for Montana citizens. The statement avoided addressing the specific timing, Sterling's involvement in drafting standards, or Morrison's dual role as former regulator and current consultant. I contacted the Montana State Ethics Commission to determine if the arrangement violated conflict of interest regulations. The commission confirmed they were reviewing the matter, but couldn't comment on ongoing investigations. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Flint Garrison, a current DEQC employee who had worked on the procurement modifications, reached out through encrypted email after seeing my information requests and department files. The rule changes weren't about improving testing standards, he wrote. They were about ensuring Sterling got the contracts. Everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to say it officially. Garrison provided internal meeting notes showing department officials had discussed accommodating Sterling's technical capabilities during rule development sessions. The notes contradicted public statements that modifications were based on industry-wide best practices. With documentation spanning 6 months, multiple sources confirming the pattern, and financial records showing the impact, the investigation had revealed a systematic effort to manipulate state procurement processes. Sterling Laboratories had gained unfair advantage through insider knowledge, regulatory capture, and carefully timed rule modifications that eliminated competition while maintaining the appearance of legitimate procurement procedures. The evidence was comprehensive, but confronting the subjects and preparing for publication would require careful legal review and additional verification to ensure the story met Tribune standards for investigative reporting. The legal review process began immediately. Tribune attorney Patricia Chen examined every document, cross-referenced sources, and verified the chain of custody for all evidence. "We need ironclad documentation before publication," she said during our Tuesday morning meeting. "This involves state contracts worth millions." I spent the next week conducting additional verification. The Montana Secretary of State's business registration database confirmed Morrison's consulting firm had been established 2 weeks before Sterling's first contract award. Property records showed Morrison had purchased a $340,000 home in Bozeman 6 months after leaving DEQC. The confrontation phase required strategic planning. I contacted Kyla Sterling first, requesting an interview about her laboratory's growth and success in state contracting. Her assistant scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday at Sterling Laboratories' Billings facility. The laboratory occupied a modern 15,000-square-foot building on the city's industrial corridor. Sterling met me in a conference room overlooking the testing floor, where technicians operated gas chromatography equipment and spectrophotometers. "We've built Montana's most advanced environmental testing facility," she said, gesturing toward the equipment. "Our capabilities exceed anything available in the region." I began with general questions about laboratory operations and expansion plans. Sterling spoke confidently about technical capabilities, staff qualifications, and quality assurance protocols. Her responses demonstrated genuine expertise in environmental chemistry and laboratory management. 20 minutes into the interview, I shifted focus to state contracts. "Your laboratory has secured significant DEQC work since 2019. Can you explain how you developed those relationships?" Sterling's demeanor changed slightly. "We compete fairly for all contracts. Our technical proposals speak for themselves." I presented the procurement modification timeline, showing how rule changes had eliminated competitors. "These modifications appear specifically designed to favor your laboratory's capabilities. Were you involved in developing these new standards?" "The department consulted with multiple laboratories about industry best practices," Sterling replied. "We provided technical input when requested, just like other qualified facilities." I mentioned Morrison's role in drafting the modifications and his subsequent consulting relationship with her laboratory. Sterling paused before responding. "David Morrison is a respected environmental professional. His expertise benefits our operations." When I asked about the timing of Morrison's hiring relative to contract awards, Sterling ended the interview. "I think we're done here. Any additional questions should go through our attorney." Morrison proved more elusive. His consulting firm's listed address was a virtual office in downtown Billings. Phone calls went to voicemail. Email requests for interviews received no response. I located Morrison's home address through property records and attempted an unscheduled visit. A neighbor indicated he was traveling frequently for work but provided no additional information. The story required additional expert analysis to establish the significance of the procurement modifications. I contacted Dr. James Whitfield, a public administration professor at Montana State University, who specialized in government contracting ethics. Whitfield reviewed the documentation and provided crucial context. "These modifications created artificial barriers that favored a single provider," he explained. "The timing suggests coordination between regulatory and private interests." His analysis confirmed that the rule changes had no basis in industry standards or regulatory requirements from other states. "This appears to be regulatory capture in its most basic form," Whitfield concluded. State Ethics Commission investigator Michael Torres contacted me after reviewing my initial inquiry. "We're conducting a formal investigation based on your information," he said. "The evidence suggests potential violations of conflict of interest statutes." Torres confirmed that Morrison's consulting arrangement with Sterling, while maintaining influence over procurement decisions, raised serious ethical concerns. The commission was examining whether proper disclosure procedures had been followed. With expert analysis complete and official investigations underway, I prepared the final story draft. The article documented the systematic manipulation of state procurement processes, the financial impact on taxpayers, and the ethical violations involved. Tribune editor Sarah Martinez conducted the final review process. "This is solid investigative work," she said. "The documentation is comprehensive, sources are credible, and the public interest is clear." The story published on Thursday morning with the headline, "State Lab Contracts Rigged Through Insider Rule Changes." The article detailed the 6-month investigation, presented evidence chronologically, and included responses from all parties contacted. Sterling Laboratories issued a statement denying wrongdoing and emphasizing their technical qualifications. Morrison's attorney provided a brief response, claiming all activities were legal and properly disclosed. The immediate impact was significant. Governor's office announced a comprehensive review of state procurement procedures, DEQC suspended pending contract awards, pending investigation completion. Legislative oversight committees scheduled hearings for the following month. Local television stations picked up the story, interviewing affected competitors and government officials. The Associated Press distributed a condensed version statewide, generating coverage in Helena, Missoula, and Great Falls newspapers. Within 48 hours, 3 additional sources contacted me with information about similar arrangements in other state departments. The investigation had exposed broader patterns of regulatory capture affecting multiple agencies and contractors. Federal Election Commission records showed Morrison had made significant political contributions to officials involved in DEQC oversight. The pattern suggested influence peddling beyond the immediate procurement manipulation. 2 weeks after publication, the Montana Attorney General's office announced a criminal investigation into potential fraud and conspiracy charges. Sterling Laboratories lost its largest state contract, worth $2.3 million annually. Morrison's consulting firm dissolved within a month. Property records showed he had listed his Bozeman home for sale and relocated to Colorado, where he had no known business interests. The investigation had achieved its primary objective, exposing corruption and ensuring accountability. The truth was documented, verified, and published through proper journalistic channels. 6 months later, I sat in my cubicle at the Billings Tribune, reviewing notes for a new investigation into municipal water testing irregularities. The Sterling Laboratories case had become a distant memory, filed away with dozens of other completed stories. The Montana Attorney General's office had secured plea agreements from 3 individuals involved in the procurement scheme. Morrison received 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud charges. 2 DEQC. Officials accepted lesser sentences in exchange for cooperation. Sterling Laboratories had permanently lost its state certification. The company dissolved in March, with assets liquidated to pay outstanding debts and legal settlements. Former employees found positions with legitimate testing facilities across the region. The state implemented comprehensive procurement reforms based on our investigation's findings. New oversight mechanisms required independent review of all regulatory changes affecting contract awards. Conflict of interest disclosure requirements expanded to include consulting relationships and political contributions. I established cooperation with ethics enforcement agencies, providing documentation and testimony that strengthened their cases against the conspirators. The collaborative approach had proven more effective than traditional adversarial journalism. 3 follow-up investigations emerged from sources who contacted me after the original story. Similar procurement manipulation schemes were discovered in transportation and environmental services departments. Each case followed the same pattern: regulatory capture through insider rule changes. The Billings Tribune won a Montana Press Association Award for investigative excellence. More importantly, the series had generated lasting reforms protecting taxpayer interests and ensuring fair competition in government contracting. My current investigation involved municipal water quality testing contracts in Yellowstone County. Early evidence suggested similar manipulation tactics, though the scope appeared smaller than the Sterling case. The phone rang. Another anonymous tip about irregularities in state highway construction oversight. I opened a new notebook and began taking notes, following the same methodical approach that had exposed the laboratory contract scheme. Each investigation built upon previous experience. Document analysis techniques improved with practice. Source development became more efficient through established networks. The work continued, one story at a time. The Sterling investigation had demonstrated journalism's essential role in government accountability. Corruption thrived in darkness but withered under sustained scrutiny and professional reporting standards. Morrison's scheme had cost taxpayers millions while compromising public health protections. The investigation had restored integrity to the procurement process and prevented future manipulation through the same methods. The truth was out, and the story was finally told.